What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some details about Geneforge 3 Detonation, which is a remake, or soon-to-be remake, of Geneforge 3, one of the mini CRPGs from small developer Spiderweb Software, that I have been, over the course of the past couple years actually, been taking a look at a good chunk of their remakes. But a few things to just throw out there right at the start of the video. Much of the footage you're seeing on screen is actually going to be from the Geneforge 2 remake. However, it's going to look very, very similar to what Geneforge 3 winds up looking like because the visuals aren't going to change that much. I will still be throwing up an important screen or two here and there that is specifically from Geneforge 3. I just didn't want anybody to get confused about that. Now, the reason I'm choosing to go that route is because there's not a ton of footage of Geneforge 3 itself right now, because a lot of the information that I'm bringing you is from a Kickstarter campaign. That Kickstarter ends in just a couple of days. And as always, when I mention Kickstarter, I do not personally endorse them. However, I did back this project personally. Now, whether or not that's something you want to do is something you have to decide on your own. Speaking from personal experience, I've never had a problem with Spiderweb Software in this regard. They've always done very well there. And so, wanting to see more of the series, I chose to back it. Moving on a little bit though, if you have never heard of Geneforge, I'm excited to be the one to tell you about it because while it's not the most impressive game visually, the series as a whole is incredibly interesting just from the premise, which is that of wizards known as shapers who rule this world using their ability to quite literally shape life, which gets as crazy and incredibly unethical as you could probably imagine just from me saying it. However, the original Geneforge series is quite old. I think the first one released in like 1999. I think Geneforge 3 specifically was from 2005. Back when Spiderweb Software was one of very few developers holding down the fort for CRPGs when the industry had largely seen them die for a while. And so, Geneforge, just like the Avernum series, are quite old and have been getting remakes from Spiderweb Software over the past few years, and I've been covering those remakes myself. I've covered 1 through 4 of Avernum out of a total of 6, and then I've covered the first 2 of ultimately 5 Geneforge games. Those reviews are available if you want to go take a look at them and get the gist of the series at large. But Geneforge 2 in particular had an incredible story, and I've been looking forward to seeing how Geneforge 3 shapes up. And so along comes this Kickstarter with some interesting information about how everything is going to be implemented, some changes being made, that kind of thing. And I suppose that's probably the best place to start in terms of the actual details, is that it does look like there's going to be some significant changes. Some are just nice quality of life stuff. For instance, with these games being what you can see on screen here, it might not be a surprise then that character was pretty limited. You would mostly just pick one of 3 classes. Now though, we actually have male and female options for each individual class, giving you a little more variety there, even if there's still no like proper cosmetic character creation. So little stuff like that is honestly very welcome. But other changes, I am just kind of curious how they're going to play out overall. Because Geneforge 3 is a decent place to jump into it story-wise, but it does also follow up on the previous 2 games a little bit in the sense that Geneforge 3 takes the events of the previous games and kicks off a brutal rebellion from the people that the Shapers keep oppressed. The Shapers, with their incredible power for shaping life, have some incredibly strict rules, and the penalty for breaking them is death, and that applies to humans, other Shapers, everybody. Now, through their power and this iron grip that they've had on the world, they have sort of forced it into prosperity, and yet that is quite literally built on the back of, in some cases, sentient creations that they have been making. And so that ultimately leads to this big rebellion, which is the kickoff point for Geneforge 3. But right away, we know we're getting some changes there because Spiderweb Software has already committed to adding more factions and changing things up a little bit and just kind of giving you more options to play around with that main story. It's my understanding, though I do not know personally, that the original game allowed you to choose between the Shapers or the Rebels, and that was kind of the main 2 paths through the game, and here at the very least, just from the trailer on the Kickstarter, it seems to be implied that there will be at least one more third sort of neutral option where you don't side with any of them, with some other factions and things potentially added as well. In any event, that story takes place over the course of 5 islands. It has been confirmed that those 5 islands will be a singular map this time around instead of things you have to load between. And one new mechanic to the remake in particular is known as the fuser system. You'll be picking up seemingly like mutations that you can then add to your character for special effects to give you a little bit of extra build diversity, if you will. But one thing I'm actually really curious about that I don't have confirmation for is that a big part of Geneforge 3 was actually that you not only had the creations that your shaper will inevitably be making, which kind of serve as your party in the previous games. The original Geneforge 3 had you taking on 2 actual companions with you that then sort of changed up the story a little bit depending on which faction you sided with. However, in every bit of the material I've seen thus far for the Geneforge 3 remake, I have not seen those 2 companion characters with you at all. So I don't know if they're still going to be there or if there have been changes made to like make sure they're not actual party members and just keep it to the creations, etc. I don't know either way, so I think that's one thing in particular that this remake might be changing a little bit, in addition to all the new like factions and stuff we meet along the way. Speaking of creations and abilities and all that, it looks like as a baseline, they will be adding some new spells and stuff, so that on top of the actual creation should be the primary way you approach combat, which was a pretty standard turn-based system in all the previous games, but the creations, the new sort of mutations via the fuser stuff, as well as the new spells added should theoretically keep this a little bit on the fresher side. But that is not all, because as with any good Kickstarter, there are stretch goals, and quite a few of them have been met already, so I can pretty safely talk about those ones as if they will actually happen, and that is, for starters, the very first one, a new creation. So one of the core gameplay elements of the Geneforge series is making your own creations, entities that will help you in combat and have, varying bits of utility that you can make use of in those situations. How you do that is down to things like your ability to control them. You can also focus on things like spells and whatnot if you want to lean into those stuff, so you don't have to play into the shaper side of things, but you can. And so it's probably no surprise then that one of the stretch goals was to make a new one. We also saw this in the previous Geneforge games with creations like the cockatrice, but the exact what has not been decided yet, simply that there will be a new one. On top of that, another one of the stretch goals will be a bigger faction. So in addition to the work they already planned to do to expand the main story, the second stretch goal was all about making another large faction that will have its own leaders, quest lines, etc. So this should be an entirely brand new way to play through the game in addition to what was planned as a baseline. They've apparently already started work on that, so it should be good to go, I would imagine. And then there is one more stretch goal that is likely to be met, but is not technically met there just yet, and that is another sort of secret storyline that they'll add into the game, just kind of giving you something extra to explore and find, which is something the original games were pretty good at. But I do think that is just about everything I want to talk about right this second. I mostly just wanted to shine the light on this one, give it a little bit of press, if you will, as again, I was a huge fan of the first 2 remakes. 2 in particular is incredibly well written. I like what they've done with the Avernum remakes, and I'm always happy to put my money where my mouth is when it comes to CRPGs, which is why I backed this project personally. But that is just about going to do it for this video. So as I mentioned, the goal here is to have this release in early 2027. They've got an estimation of April over on the Kickstarter page, and thus far, with their Kickstarters, they have mostly managed to hit those goals. I think a couple of them have been like a month or 2 past that estimation, but for the most part, they have stayed pretty well on track. So I would imagine we will almost certainly see this game in 2027, and I will certainly be reviewing it. But that is pretty much all I've got for you in the meantime. Certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.